concept that what America first was take care of what's happening in your own backyard and stop meddling in foreign affairs. And now they're waking up almost on a daily basis to seeing Donald Trump proudly and aggressively talking about meddling in all sorts of foreign affairs. Is there a contradiction or hypocrisy or even a betrayal of voters going on here?
Not at all. First of all, Venezuela is in our own backyard, and it's been the policy of the United States in 1803 to manage the Western Hemisphere. So that, that's a cornerstone of American foreign policy.
Yeah, Michael, a couple of things, all right? One, it's 1823. It's a very simple mistake. It's not really the problem with what he said. It doesn't matter if we've had a policy for X number of years, okay? That doesn't morally justify that policy. We also had slavery for centuries. A policy's, moral virtue is not determined by how long we've had it in place. There are plenty of things that we've overturned, we've outlawed, because we recognize, oh shit, that's really bad. We also had segregation in this country for a long time. I know some of Michael's supporters probably, want to go back to that. But y'all can fuck off. Go back to Europe then. Oh, and another thing before I move on, okay? I mean, maybe someone can think of an example of U.S. intervention that has ended positively. I doubt it. There are plenty of examples of the United States intervening in Latin American countries that have ended in untold numbers of people dying, right? Guatemala, there was a 30-year civil war as a result of U.S. intervention, overthrowing their president that was democratically elected. And we backed their military dictatorship, which ended up killing 200,000 Mayan civilians. Similarly, in El Salvador, we backed their military dictatorship, and they had fucking death squads roaming the country. In Nicaragua, we backed the Contras to overthrow the socialist Sandinistas, which, by the way, fought back against a dictatorship that the U.S. imposed, but whatever. We backed the Contras, which were basically a CIA army, paramilitary group, who went around massacring civilians. In Chile, in 1973, we overthrew their socialist, their democratically elected socialist president and installed a right-wing dictatorship, which killed and tortured thousands of people. Not just in Chile, but throughout Latin America. And one of those motherfuckers killed a Chilean diplomat in the United States. I could go on and on and on and on. This is what Michael supports. He is supporting the deaths of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. This guy should be in jail.
I think it is charming that Dave is defining America first in the way that he prefers, and I think there are plenty of people who wish to do that. But Dave, though a very popular podcaster, never won a presidential election, and Trump has been clear on what he means by America first, the political movement that he built, that people voted for in his coalition since the beginning.
Right, because you can never go back on what you've said.
President Trump campaigned the first time around on destroying ISIS. So obviously that does not mean that America's only going to look inward. President Trump has carried out attacks, military operations that were extremely successful in Iran, in Syria, in Afghanistan, obviously in Venezuela. He's been talking about taking Greenland and even invading America's evil top hat, Canada, though I think he's mostly joking about that one, since the beginning. So that's what that means. And what it comes down to is that America is a global empire. We just are. People can be upset about that, but unless you're geopolitics...
We just are. We literally have to be. We have to be. Despite it creating more instability throughout the world.
Strictly from Reddit, if your geopolitics actually comes from history, you recognize that we've been an empire since the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And we've been a muscular global empire since the Second World War. So President Trump's vision, I think, actually rejects two extremes. It rejects a conservative isolationism, and it rejects a liberal internationalism, and it posits a conservative imperialism that says that we are going to recognize our role in the world, but we are...
No new wars. No new wars. This is exactly what fucking Matt Walsh did, right? He spent years, towing the, Trump line while Trump was running for his second term. Oh, Trump, didn't start any new wars and, during the first year of his presidency, he ended all these wars, and now he's going to start a bunch of wars. Isn't he great for doing that?
We're going to pursue that role in limited ways with America's interest at heart. So there's been no regime change in Venezuela. We're talking about regime change in Venezuela. The regime is still in place. What we did was depose the leader. We left the vice president in place, and we said, act in a way that is appropriate in accordance with the law and our interests, or we're going to kill you. That's very different than a Bushy-era neocon regime change in Iraq. Even when we're talking about Iran, the Trump administration has not gone in a particularly overt way yet. But even there, we would be talking about a restoration of the Pahlavi regime, most likely, that goes back to 1925. So I grant there are all sorts of...
Okay. That is wrong. Iran had democratic elections in, I think the late 40s, early 50s, whatever it was, right? That, put a prime minister in power, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was overthrown by the fucking U.S. and the Brits, too. They also suck dick. You really want to put the Pahlavi dynasty back in power when you saw how well that worked out last time. I mean, do you know history? The Iranian Revolution would not have happened if we didn't overthrow their fucking leader.
Pahlavi regime, most likely, that goes back to 1925. So I grant there are all sorts of risks to interventions, but we're the global empire, and frankly, even the American Revolution comes out of wars of global empire. It comes out of the 7 Years' War, which itself was a derivation of the War of Austrian Succession. To pretend that we don't have a role in...
Who the fuck cares? That doesn't mean we have to fucking overthrow every goddamn government we don't like. I know we have the power to do it. Obviously, we have the power to do it. Does that give us a moral right to do it? Sell me on that, dipshit.
In geopolitics is to ignore all of American history.
Okay, Carl Kalinske, I can see you grimacing through a lot of what Michael was saying there. You said Trump says the US will run Venezuela and he threatens Colombia and Mexico. Arrest this psychotic motherfucker. Before I get you to expand on that thesis, I mean, the point I was making to Dave, if I want to elaborate on where I sit with this, because I've had a bit of time to look at this play out, is you look at Maduro. Everyone thought, my God, this is going to be World War III. Actually, Maduro is going to end up in a New York courtroom and he's been got rid of. Everyone seems to agree that's a good thing for not just the Venezuelan people, but the world. No American troops died in what was an incredibly efficient surgical military strike to get him out of there.
Right. We don't really know if American soldiers didn't die. Of course, the U.S. wouldn't say they did. But you're just going to brush over the fact that 30 plus Venezuelans and 20 plus Cubans, or it's the other way. Oh, also, at least 25 civilians were killed. Oh, but it was super efficient and surgical and all this bullshit. Who the fuck cares?
And if you have a more compliant leader of Venezuela, albeit part of the same regime, that can probably only be a good thing. If you look at the argument about Greenland, for example, I've been struck by some of the people that I didn't expect to think this was a good idea. There was a British general last week talking about this, saying that from a strategic security point of view, it would make perfect sense for America to have Greenland. And is there a deal to be done? He didn't think invading it was the right thing, and nor do I. But is there a deal to be done with 60,000 people who live in Greenland that could actually improve the security of the United States and the West against the obvious threat from China and Russia and so on? And I can get through the others. Iran, getting rid of the Ayatollah and the mullahs is unquestionably a good thing for the world. It's how you do these things and whether you plan and prepare properly for what follows next that I think are the debatable points. And history says that's normally, unfortunately, been very badly done.
To put it lightly, yeah.
When I said to Dave that I understand the argument, I may not agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil. And the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said, is frankly not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America first actually meant America first.
No, Kyle, but you don't understand, right? We're all going to get, Venezuelan oil dividend checks. We're going to get gold dividends, all right? We're going to all get fucking rich, dude. I mean, just look at every other imperialist war we've engaged in. We've all gotten individually rich from this. Oh, wait, that didn't happen.
By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime.
Right.
Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is
how could this have happened? How could there have been consequences for our actions, man? Like, we just thought we'd go in and, say this oil is ours now, and bing, bang, boom, we're done.
If you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because...
You can't nod that away. That is absolutely your position, you stupid fuck. No, his is everything America does is right. When the standards are applied to anything else, any other country, I don't like it. I just like when America gets to dominate everything and, fucking overthrow leaders, destabilize their economies, kill tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. I want to be able to do that, but I don't want anyone else to be able to do that. And that makes us the good guys somehow. I don't know.
You have the right to do it, and we have bigger guns, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is, why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law, or was that all a joke? We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws, and Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico.
No.
And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump could do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you...
No. And that also includes pedophilia. Michael Knowles supports pedophilia. He is a pedophile protector. He does not want the Epstein files to be released because his daddy will get in trouble. So they're scrubbing the entire Epstein files to get rid of Trump's name, to get rid of all of his friends' names, all of the Republicans, so that you think it's only Bill Clinton. That's who this guy is. That's what you've done with your life, Michael. You protect pedophiles. You must be so proud of yourself.
Is there anything Trump could do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act, I thought, was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem?
My problem is that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you
and
say
you
that?
know that what he's doing is
I just answered your
and
question.
you don't care.
I just answered your question. And I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist? You brought up a point. You brought up international law. And you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. Excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity.
Notice how he's completely just ignoring Kyle calling him out for protecting a warlord, pedophile, rapist, because that is what Donald Trump is. And he knows that he cannot actually, argue against those facts. So he has to... Oh, remember when I got you on this really pedantic point about international law? Ha ha ha, I fucking win. No, dude. No, you're a fucking loser. You're a loser who has cucked yourself into defending pedophilia, defending the billionaires. You are a slave, Michael. You're a fucking slave.
But I could not disagree more with the take on Venezuela. And I think it's crazy, Piers. I also think, it just after the last 25 years, and I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but the idea that we're just talking about regime changes in Iran and Venezuela and saying it would undoubtedly be a good thing if this regime were to fall. Well, maybe, but there's a really important question of what comes next. And if you want to say that, like, I mean, we've had a long history of regime changes in Latin America that have been disastrous too. We overthrew a communist government in the 50s in Guatemala, led to a civil war where hundreds of thousands of people died. So the idea that it's a guarantee.
But Michael wants that. He wants that. Do you not think Michael Knowles knows about regime change in Latin America historically? You think he doesn't know that? He absolutely knows about Guatemala. He knows about the Mayan genocide, which the state of Israel is complicit in, by the way. That's not just me saying, oh, the Jews. No, literally, the state of Israel trained and funded and provided weapons to the Guatemalan military to commit a genocide against the Mayan people. And this fuckface knows that. He wants more death. As long as his, as long as his benefactors benefit from this, he doesn't give a fuck. He don't give a fuck who dies.
That it would be a good thing if either one of these regimes fell. We certainly don't know that. And one of the other things we know is that you really don't get much of a say in what replaces the regime that falls unless you're willing to militarily occupy the country. And we've had regime change. We might be able to effect a full regime change without a military occupation, as we did in Libya, as we did in Syria. But those are not great examples where the country worked out. I mean, Syria is hanging on by a hair, and Libya is an absolute catastrophe. I mean, so it's just like, it's very reckless when you start playing. You start dropping bombs on human beings, you start toppling governments, you start kidnapping or taking, leaders of.
It doesn't matter, dude, because Michael Knowles is sitting in his air-conditioned studio. Michael Knowles is safe. He's okay. Random brown people don't fucking matter to him. As long as we get their stuff and his billionaire donors are happy, he does not care.
Countries, there's unintended consequences that come with all of these things. That's probably the one lesson in all of this military history, is that nobody is smart enough to predict exactly what's going to come next. And so I just think it's, I see this with the situation in Iran. I say Michael Knowles are there. It's like, guys, it's like you hoist up the mission accomplished banner 2 days after the strike. We have absolutely no idea what's going to come of this. Obviously, in the situation in Iran, just right in front of all of our eyes, Pierce, what the goalposts have moved from 60% enriched uranium, which is what me and Coleman were arguing about a few months ago. That's out the window now, right? Nobody even cares about or is pretending there's a nuclear threat. Donald Trump's bragging about how it's obliterated. Then both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump moved the goalpost to intercontinental ballistic missiles, and then that was the war propaganda for a couple months there. Now it's over whether they shoot protesters or rioters. Not even like an accusation that they're committing a genocide or are a threat to another country. They invaded their neighbor, nothing like that. So I would just say, I think one of the most important lessons, and Michael, who's a history buff, would know that every last one of the founders of this country talked about this all the time, is that you want to be sober and calm and rational. You want to not intervene when you don't need to. There's all types of unintended consequences that can come from these things. And that's why the advice of the founders was be friends with the world. Don't get into entangling alliances. Don't search for monsters to destroy, to fight unnecessary wars.
So you're totally right. There is always a risk to regime change. And I don't mean to downplay that, but you have to factor in there is a risk to letting rogue regimes that, for instance, in the case of Venezuela, invite Hezbollah into the country, buy weapons from all of our adversaries, Iran, China, Russia, etc. A regime that has literally run this country, which used to be one of the wealthier countries in Latin America, into the ground, to the point that people are literally eating wildlife. They're breaking into zoos, eating.
You mean they're not eating their dogs?
Cats and dogs.
Oh, there we go.
This regime has totally destroyed the country.
Right.
There is a risk to allowing a country like that to just continue doing whatever it's going to do.
Is there a risk? Because we've seemed pretty safe since Maduro has taken power. There was no threat to U.S. national security. That is a neocon talking point. Fuck you, Coleman Hughes. You don't know what you're talking about. So I guess anytime a country is, struggling to feed its population, blah, 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 we get to overthrow their government. and take all of their natural resources. That's what Coleman's saying. Of course, he ignores the absolutely fatal economic sanctions that the U.S. imposed under Obama and under Trump that literally led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people. They were unable to get food, to get medicine, to get spare parts for their factories and their oil rigs and all this crap, right? They couldn't access international financial markets. Trump slapped sanctions on countries that were trying to work with Venezuela. Okay? Why doesn't that factor into your analysis? And then Maduro starts a program to feed his population, send every family a box full of food. And then because of the US sanctions, he's trying to feed his own people, despite everyone saying, oh, well, he's trying to starve his population. And then you're like, oh, but also this program that is designed to feed his population. Oh, well, he's just buying votes. Well, no, you're moving the goalpost. And then you have the U.S. try to sabotage that program. So the U.S. causes the economic instability, causes a shortage of food. The Venezuelan government tries to correct for that, tries to provide a backstop, and then the U.S. sabotages that program. Like, if you don't know this stuff, then you don't have a complete picture of why Venezuela is in the fucking condition that it's in.
And so the idea that inaction has no risks is one thing I want to flag as a false argument. And the second thing I want to say is you're quick to reach for analogies to the Middle East. And I understand that. I mean, the American public has lost.
No, dude, you don't even have to look to the Middle East. Look in Latin America.
So much faith in the American political class because of our interventions in the Middle East. And the lesson I think you've drawn and other people have drawn is that therefore regime change is always wrong. I don't think that that's the right lesson. I mean, to me, that's analogous to taking the lesson from World War II that regime change is always right because it worked in Japan and Germany. The truth is it's different depending on the situation on the ground. In most of the middle, you're talking about Iraq, Syria, Yemen, you're talking about deeply sectarian countries with deep divisions, countries that are essentially civil wars waiting to happen if the lid comes off. Venezuela is not a country like that. Again, the risk is not zero, but it's not a sectarian country. It was a functioning country for a very long time. And so the risk of civil war type outcomes like Syria and Iraq is just much lower than it is in the Middle East.
So what
Dude,
about
you have no idea what you're talking about. 30-year civil war in Guatemala, a civil war in El Salvador, a civil war in Nicaragua. There are endless examples of this shit, dude. Are you fucking serious? You don't have to look outside Latin America to see what can happen.
Let's bring it to Iran. What's your view of what's happening there?
Well, Iran is, I think it's, you're asking me, Pierce?
Yeah.
I think we should support the opposition. Absolutely. I don't think we should put boots on the ground.
You work
I think
for CBS.
I agree with Dave. Our record in the Middle East
outlet.
recently, I think, precludes that for many reasons, just practical reasons. But we absolutely should support the opposition. Iran was a country that was a semi-functional democracy for a very long time. In a lot of ways, it's a more coherent country, a more coherent body politic than Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, et cetera. So I think the odds of success for a revolution there are higher. Totally support the opposition. I want to see the Islamic regime go down on their terms. And we should do what we can to support that short of full-scale military intervention.
All right, Dave, you respond, then we'll come to Michael.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, there's just so much there. And, like, look, I mean, even if you're going to say that, like, well, we have a bad track record of regime change in the Middle East, I mean, I think I made this point. I think I saw your point coming. And that's why I said, yeah, we also have a terrible track record of regime change in Central and South America. And that's why I gave the example of Guatemala. We can look at Nicaragua. We can look at all types of different interventions that just got a whole lot of people killed and didn't do anything for the people or for the country. And Coleman, yeah, fair enough. There's a risk to inaction the same way there's a risk to action. But the risk to action is to our boys and our budget and bankrupting our country. And so it's just a totally different risk that you take on when you intervene than when you don't. And, you know, I got to say, Coleman, these are the same arguments that were used in Iraq. What you said about what you said about Venezuela and Iran. This is why the neocons said we were going to be greeted as liberators. Chalabi had assured them that the people hated Saddam and they were going to be pro-American. And you said there's not sectarian conflict in Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela, no, of course there is. It's the mixed European elite class and then the majority of natives. And that's who Chavez and Maduro always carried. At least I know in Chavez's election, that was always his base. And I agree with you, man. Like, it is true that that government has ruined that country. I am not, I hate socialism as much, if not more, than anybody on this panel. But the thing is, like, it was a communist government in Guatemala too. And the civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people there didn't make it better for them. And so I just think that, like, the idea that we're so confident we should back the resistance in Iran. Well, we also had regime changes in that region that didn't require like huge numbers of boots on the ground, and they were catastrophes too. And to hear you guys talk about the most likely thing is that, but you know, because now you understand we have to spread hereditary monarchy. We're not bringing democracy anymore. The idea that the Shaw's kid is going to walk in there and take power. I say, of all the crazy things Donald Trump has said, that was one thing that I think he got right. Yeah, I don't think he's got the juice. And the options of what would arise in either of these conflicts, there's at least a strong possibility that there'd be tons of conflict and a worse government, if not just as bad a government at the end of the day.
Is it not better for America to sit back and watch the Iranian people determine their own future in the way that appears to be happening than potentially cause mayhem by directly interfering on their behalf?
Well, I think those are two separate points, and I think my friends on this panel are taken with a lot of abstract ideology, whether it's libertarianism or leftism. I'm a little more interested in practical politics. So what I think is most important here is that Iran remains orderly and does not descend into total chaos. Iran is a real country with a more of a unified history, and also that the Iranian people do better. Obviously, the Islamic Revolution was terrible for them. It destroyed their material conditions, led to a huge erosion of their rights and liberties, and so it's worth remembering that
Why was there a revolution in Iran, Michael?
Policy of the United States has been for regime change in Iran since 1979. So the Iranians have...
What the fuck? Okay, he can't be this fucking stupid. Can he? I thought he was just a little bit smarter than the average conservative commentator. The U.S. did regime change in Iran in 1953. We overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh because he had the audacity to nationalize the oil industry, because God forbid people who actually have natural resources get to, benefit from that. That belongs to us. That's ours. God says so. But yes, the U.S. has been interested in regime change since the 50s.
We have interests around the world. Dave keeps pointing to his displeasure over one intervention in Guatemala. The United States has intervened for 150 years, 88 times in Latin America. It's usually worked out very well. Sometimes it hasn't worked out well. But what would have been worse is if we had let, during the Cold War, the Soviets get a hold in Latin America. What is worse is allowing communists to run roughshod, both from the perspective of the people there as well as from the interests of the United States.
No. Not for the interests of people there. Not for the interest of people there. For the interest of U.S. corporations, and by extension, Americans, to the degree that we get cheaper products. It's not really for the benefit of the, Latin American people. That is bullshit. Bullshit.
We back 73% of the world's dictatorships. The idea that we say, here's the dictator we don't like, we're going to overthrow them, is ridiculous. By any objective standard, Netanyahu is worse than Maduro, and we're not overthrowing him. So the whole conversation is absurd. We're in no position to be the world police or the moral arbiters. In fact, Trump himself literally says, this is about the oil. It's about the natural resources. It's about stealing that from the corporations and the billionaires. So the whole conversation about
I think it could be. I actually think I think Venezuela can be about a number of things at the same time. That's why I think nuance is an important factor in these things. It can be
but
part.
That's the
Hang on,
Kyle.
Can it just be pointed out?
It can be about oil. It can be about oil. It can be about Maduro being a gangster. It can be about
Pierce,
a number of things.
This was
Trump's a gangster.
sold to us.
Trump's a gangster.
all right. Isn't it funny that we have this whole conversation? And while you're saying it could be about all these things, you know what no one's bringing up? Drugs. And that's what it was sold to us as.
Right.
Just like all these other wars, they just lie through their teeth. It has nothing to do with the drug problem or a tiny fraction of it. And nothing to do with the fentanyl problem, which is the real crisis. It's a total pretext for war. And, I got to say, man, by the way, I kind of agree with Michael on the concept of international law. But the thing about it is that this is totally illegal by our own law, by the Constitution of the United States of America, which every politician puts their hand on a Bible and swears before all of us to God that they will do everything
Michael's like, what?
in their power to defend and execute. There was no imminent attack here. Donald Trump had all the time in the world to go to Congress and get permission for this, and he just didn't want to. And if you want to just say, like, by the way, Mike, it's funny because you point out I'm a libertarian or Kyle's a leftist. Ironically, we're the only ones taking the conservative position here on this. We are not an empire.
Is that so?
Actually, the Supreme, yes, that's actually right. There's a long tradition. Do you know your history on this, Michael?
There's a long tradition of
Well, hold on, let me
libertarians
finish
telling
my-
conservatives what we believe. And I'm
there's
sick of it for one.
No. There's a long tradition of the best conservatives having the exact same foreign policy I do, and then a bunch of former communists who were atheists convinced you guys that it was right wing to support wars everywhere. By the way, the Monroe
They
Doctrine
convinced
isn't
Thomas
even-
Jefferson in
I don't think-
1801. I don't know about that.
No. I'm not talking about the Barbary wars. Okay, anyway.
Or the
point
Monroe
is that
administration or the
Okay,
Roosevelt
again,
administration.
Dude, do you even know what the Monroe Doctrine is? You say the Monroe Doctrine means that we get to run our hemisphere? No, it doesn't.
No,
the Monroe
it means that
Doctrine.
we keep our
Michael, let me
adversaries
finish
out
a
of our
thought, and then you can.
Right, but we're not just keeping our adversaries out, Michael. You know that. You're full of shit.
Respond to it. No, that's not actually true. It meant that Europe couldn't have any more colonies here, and in turn, we wouldn't interfere in Europe. By the way, it's not a law. It's something a president said once in a
Exactly.
speech, and it hasn't been
It's
the
our foreign
cornerstone
policy.
of our foreign. It hasn't been. We haven't. Have we not interfered in
for over
Europe?
200 years.
Have we not interfered in Europe for over 200 years? Is that what you're
They
telling
begged
me,
us to,
Michael?
and then we became the world empire.
That's
true.
right,
Yeah,
exactly. So we abandoned the Monroe Doctrine. We never followed it at all.
abandon the
It's
Mon-
just,
well,
and the Monroe Doctrine never said
We didn't just intervene in Europe during World War I and World War II. We also fucking did a lot of shady shit with the CIA. We allied ourselves with fucking literal Nazis to sabotage communist movements. That's a little different than helping our allies out in a war.
They said that Europe couldn't establish more colonies. They already had several. That they couldn't establish more colonies. It didn't say that if there's a country that does a mineral deal with a country somewhere else because we won't allow our companies to do it with them, that therefore we can topple the leader. This is completely illegal by
I'm
our
happy to
own
explain this to you, Dave.
constitution.
I'm happy to explain it. It's true. In 1823, the Soviet Union did not yet exist, and other adversaries around the world did not yet exist. We have expanded the notion that European powers, which were a threat to us, should not interfere in the Western Hemisphere to those other adversaries as well, who you recognize are adversaries. It seems to me where the big difference here on the panel is that you, Dave, at least will acknowledge that America has interests and there are bad regimes. You're making some crazy claims that the Constitution doesn't allow the United States to be commander-in-chief of the Army. You're making a crazy claim that Congress
No, I'm
needs
not.
to
I'm
declare
saying it
this
doesn't
right
allow
away
them
as well.
to
It's not
declare a
true.
war.
You're making a crazy
Yeah,
claim that it was,
this-
excuse me, you're making a crazy claim that it was somehow illegal to follow a court order from 2020 to take out Maduro and arrest him. Anyway, you're making all sorts of crazy
that
claims.
how
but
we
you're
do
making a
foreign
good
policy
claim.
by
Hold on
court
one second,
order?
guys.
Yes,
One second. I'm happy to. The difference here is, Dave, you at least acknowledge America has interests, and you're saying because we
No, who
sometimes
doesn't
make
acknowledge
mistakes.
that?
Hold on one second. I'm just trying to get my point out. Because we sometimes make mistakes, you're saying that we should not pursue those interests, or you're saying that the consequences could be worse. The point that Kyle is making is actually different from yours. Kyle's point is that America has interests, and we should oppose those interests because he thinks that America is the great Satan or something.
That's not-
I'm
that's not
actually
what I'm
making an
saying at
argument.
all.
Thank you for the
guys,
straw
guys,
man. I'm
hang on,
actually
hang
making
on.
an
We're running-
argument
we're
in
running
favor
a bit-
of
we're
law
running a
and
bit out of
order
time,
and
and I
intelligence
do-
in foreign policy.
Hang on a sec, Carl.
Thank you very much.
I think we've covered this well. I do want to move to.
Oh my god. Michael Knowles is such a fucking smarmy douchebag. Of course he can advocate for war, he can advocate for looting of other countries' resources from inside his studio, because he's too much of a fucking coward, too much of a bitch to actually go out and fight these wars. All he does is he puts a fucking gallon of gel in his hair, he wears his little foo-foo, sports coat, and barfs up a bunch of regurgitated right-wing talking points to justify the United States looting other countries' resources, overthrowing their governments, and killing a lot of people. And sometimes I do wish the draft still existed, but it only applied to Michael Knowles. I want to see Michael Knowles on the battlefield and see how that goes. And Coleman's no better. Coleman's no better. I mean, he works for the fucking free press, so what do we expect?